All right, let's get started. This is Samir, and this is my lesson to you guys about torsion. So, first of all, what is torsion? I think the best way to think about this is imagine a bar, kind of as how we have pictured here, and we have a twisting force where we have a torque applied in one direction, and we have another torque on the other side applied in the other direction, and you kind of have like, let's fix this, like this twisting motion, and it's not shown great here, but like um, there's kind of an angle displaced. That's not terribly important, but there's an angle displaced from one point to the next point. But essentially, yes, that like torsion is where a bar is rotating because there's two opposing torques on both ends. And something to note is that like torsion can also be a function of length. And one example that makes sense intuitively is a slinky, right? So instead of doing a shaft, let's replace that shaft with a slinky. And if you twist the slinky, all the little faces, if you can call it that, of the slinky are going to slide amongst one another. And that's a good analogy for kind of how torsion works. And something to note is that there's no internal twisting moment, which is essentially what torsion is. It's actually a whole bunch of shear stresses acting on the bar, kind of just as how we have pictured here. All right, so next up, formulas to know. That's the most important part. First up, we have our shear stress per area of the of the of an object that we're trying to study. This isn't quite accurate. What this is right here, that's actually our polar moment. Sorry, my handwriting is awful. Polar moment of inertia. And essentially, this isn't like your traditional moment of inertia. What this is more just like an area moment of inertia. That's like the best way to describe it. And what it does is it describes how much a cross section resists torsion. And that's essentially what that polar mode of inertia is. And if we move on to this side, right, the two formulas that we use for polar mode of inertia is what we're going to derive right now. So first thing is we calculate over dA, right? And essentially, if you look over here, in order to calculate dA over a circle, we go a distance dr and a distance d theta. So essentially what we do is we split this up into a double integral where we go over the bounds. Let's do d theta dr. So then r would be 0 to the outer radius and 0 to 2 pi here. And then we integrate and we do dr d theta. And essentially what happens is we get pi over 2 r outer radius cubed. So there's that. And then over here we get we have the same thing, but if you think about it, right, the only thing we're integrating over is from the inner distance to the outer distance. So essentially what happens is we have the same integral, right, but instead we're integrating from the inner radius to the outer radius. And essentially what we get is pi over, sorry, I keep making that mistake, pi over 2, pi over 2 outer radius minus inner radius squared, or to the 4th power. And then another thing to note is that this is our shear stress per area, but in order to expand that, we use this formula. Sorry, this formula right here, and that's a general shear stress. And another thing to know that I thought was interesting was in class we discussed having a hollow pipe versus a solid pipe, and how one has more torsional rigidity than the other. We discussed earlier that the sorry, let's get these ready. We discussed earlier that torsion is basically a function of shear stress. So essentially, let's look here. We have this, and this is just a section of our shear stress, and our solid one, right? We have about this much shear stress. Here we only have shear stress on this outer region, and so that's kind of why the hollow pipe has more torsional rigidity than the solid one. All right, that is the end of my lecture. I hope you guys enjoyed. Here's my references, like videos, and those are photo references.